Let me start by saying that the word tribe is an English word that was imported into our vocabulary, and the use of the word tribe was very deliberate when the British were making a reference to African peoples. When they talked about tribes, they talked about a people who shared a common language and who, in their view, were natives and uncivilized, and therefore normally very reluctant to use the word tribe, because as regards them, they called themselves nations. We are nations. The English would say they are the nation of the English people. The Scots are a nation, the Irish are a nation, the Welsh are a nation, but the Kikuyus are a tribe, the Luos are a tribe, the Yoruba is a tribe, the Igbo is a tribe. So when I use the word tribe from now henceforth, I'm using it simply because of its familiarity, not because it is a word that I love. And I'll use the word tribe even to describe non-African populations. It must be remembered that when the colonialists came, particularly the British, their mode of operation was divide and rule. And when they came with a system of administration that was characterized as indirect rule. And they very quickly tried to identify the differences between and amongst the tribes and exploited them to good effect. And even within the tribes, they tried to find differences and exploited them to good effect. So they incorporated some individuals to be the chieftains. So chiefs were created, assistant chiefs were created. The Kikuyu were made to believe that the Luos were their enemies, the Kambas were their enemies, and vice versa. And in that way, they planted the seed of suspicion and discord. And when African countries and African peoples started the struggle to regain their independence, it's important to note that in many African countries, the emerging leaders from different African communities recognized that ethnic animosity was artificial, and that the cultural and linguistic differences ought not to be a basis of conflict. And whether you are talking about Kenya or Uganda, you can see in the struggle for independence, people worked in solidarity without paying due regard to their tribal affiliation. The same was true in Nigeria. The same was true in Zambia. The same was true in Tanzania. The same was true in Uganda, and indeed across the continent. So that the independence movements were movements which de-emphasized ethnicity. But when we regained independence, in a number of countries, opportunistic politicians started recoiling into their ethnic cocoons and started articulating issues and giving out state largesse on the basis of ethnic affiliation. This was very evident, for example, in Kenya, when on the eve of independence, the organization of the political parties was informed fundamentally by some clear ideology, African socialism, so it was. So the Kenya African National Union was one that was nationalistic, and they talked about the things that affected Kenya as a country. But the white man very quickly came in and told the other so-called small tribes that Kanu is dominated by the Kikuyu and the Luos. Therefore, form another party that will take care of your interests. And this is how the Kenya Africa Democratic Union was put together to bring in tribes which were now manufactured, some of them Kalenjin, which put together several sub-tribes. And they also put in the Mijikenda, and they said, you are the Kenya Africa Democratic Union. Therefore, your enemies are Kanu. you can see the stealth hand of the colonialist. They are now beginning to create a post-colonial environment that is going to be conflictual, so that they continue to exploit and continue to ensure that the neo-colonial project is alive and well. Post-independence, you see that attempts are made to diffuse this. In Kenya, for example, when the KANU administration persuaded the KADU politicians to dissolve their party and to join KANU because of national solidarity. So that works very well between 1963 and 1964 and 1965. But once again, in 1966, you now begin to see in Kenya the emergence of what some historians will describe as ideological differences. But even if there is some element of a salutary gesture to ideology as being communist on the one hand and capitalist on the one hand, one begins to see ethnic characterization of that division. One begins to see politicians who are now inclining towards their ethnicity, politicians who are now making judgments based on ethnic superiority and dominance. And as a Kenyan writer and former politician once rightly say, and I agree with him, that these so-called tribal kingpins are individuals who are bankrupt of ideas. And Nyerere puts it much better. He says, any politician who uses religion and ethnicity as a basis of mobilization is one who is suffering from intellectual bankruptcy and ideological bankruptcy. They therefore weaponize their people by creating artificial enemies, and they ride on the crest of tribalism and use it as a basis of mobilization and as a basis of weaponization of the people to the detriment of the entire society. And in multi-ethnic societies, what they succeed in doing is to do exactly what the colonizer used to do: divide and rule. Because the tribal elites now recruit the hoi polloi, or the common man, into their agenda merely as cannon fodder, but essentially they are using them for political gain. And that is the nature of ethnic politics wherever one travels across the continent of Africa. But it must be remembered that tribalism is not unique to Africa. Almost all European nations are founded on tribalism. And where there are multi-ethnicities in Europe, there'll always be a problem. And if you ever doubted that that was true, remember the Spanish Civil War, remember the breakup of Yugoslavia, remember the collapse of the Soviet Union. All these are things that are happening because of ethnicity. And if you go to Asia, remember the division between India and Pakistan, and ultimately the creation of Bangladesh. All these are on the basis of tribalism, which when they are making reference to Europe, they call them nations. If you look at the so-called United Kingdom, there are tribal wars between the English and the Scots, between the English and the Irish. If you go to Central Europe, Armenians and Azerbaijanis, one can even dare say that the war between Russia and Ukraine is a tribal war. That is the reality. So never ever imagine, for example, that tribalism is unique to the continent of Africa. It would appear, a human problem. There is a way, and that way was given to us by no other than Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere of Tanzania. During our lifetime, Nyerere became the president of a country called Tanganyika, which has over 136 different ethnicities. That country entered into a political union with another country called Zanzibar to create a country called Tanzania. If you go to Tanzania, the mode of mobilization is ideological. We are Tanzanians. It started with Ujamaa, with the Arusha Declaration in 1967, with Kiswahili language as the unifier. Tanzania is one of the few countries in the continent of Africa where somebody from one ethnic group can contest for a political seat in another area populated by another ethnic group, and he or she will be elected on the basis of their belongingness to Chama cha Mapinduzi or Chadema. Nyerere demonstrated it, and he said that what we must do is to celebrate our diversity. If you are Chaga, or Amhaya, or Sukuma, or Luo, or Mnyakyusa, celebrate your Mnyakyusa-ness, or Sukuma-ness, or Chaga-ness, but that should not stand in the way of your Tanzania-ness. Another person who tried to do it was Samora Moises Machel of Mozambique. And Samora said, for the new African nation to thrive and survive, the tribe must die. And what did it mean? That the tribe must die, that the tribalism as a basis of political mobilization must be thrown to the museums of history to reside alongside old implements like stone cutting instruments. That happened, so it can be done. Unfortunately, in Kenya, we have had a group of selfish politicians. This is Kenya's undoing. A great country with a great people, but with some of the worst politicians whose only claim to fame is that with one side of the mouth they claim they are Kenyans, but with the other side of the mouth they are mobilizing their people on the basis of ethnicity and ethnic affiliation. That is our undoing. And until the day that we change what sometimes I call either a character transplant of these selfish, ethnic inclined politicians or a total mental revolution, ethnicity will always be the modus operandi in Kenya. And it is incumbent and it behooves those who love this country to begin to sing the message of unity in diversity. You see people calling people from their tribe, not for cultural purposes, and even if they do so for cultural purposes, that is merely a veneer. They mobilize them along ethnicity. And if that is the way in which you want to deal with your country, then it is something that is dangerous. So our problem in Kenya are politicians who are bankrupt of ideas, politicians who weaponize their people on the basis of ethnicity, politicians who then get into public office on the basis of ethnic affiliation, and therefore they engage in ethnic discrimination, and therefore they create an environment where people cease to be patriotic to the Kenyan nation, but they become patriots of their own tribes. That is the tragedy of this country. Can it be resolved? Yes, it can. It will take time, but there are people within this country who are beginning to recognize that that is the wrong route and that there is another route worthy of being taken. You know, when I hear people saying that intermarriage will solve tribalism, I laugh at it. That is a very simplistic way of dealing with a very key issue. Intermarriage, love between two individuals, defies ethnicity, defies race, defies cultures. That has happened throughout the ages. But those ages have also demonstrated that when people are mobilized along ethnic lines, then when the chips are down, wives have turned against husbands and vice versa. During the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, husbands turned against their wives and they killed them. They killed their own children. So that is not the thing. What we must do is to change our minds and change our attitudes and say with Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe that there is only one race in the world, and that is the human race. And that the God whom we worship and serve only created as diversity, as indeed he has white birds and black birds. And as I've said at a different forum, and I repeat, it takes the black and white of a piano to create symphony. If we recognize that, then we would recognize that that is nature, that is divine. But to say simply marry and then ethnicity or tribalism ends, I'm one who is a proponent of cultural celebration. I want the Ovambo in Angola and the Ovimbundu to celebrate their culture. I want the Yoruba to celebrate their culture. I want the Baganda to celebrate their culture. I want the Agekoyo to celebrate their culture. I want the Bukusu to celebrate their culture, the Igbo to celebrate their culture. But after that is celebrated, when we come to the table of the things that need to be done, then their Igbo-ness must not stand in the way of doing things that we as human beings ought to do. The word modern is one that I don't want to use. The word modern suggests that our cultures are not modern. What is happening is that in many African countries, particularly the elite, we tend to be attracted to things that are foreign, particularly Western culture. And you see these in the manner in which we dress. We see the manner in which our dark-skinned women are bleaching. It is actually now statistically proven that over 40% of African women bleach their skin. You see the manner in which our African women wear long artificial nails in order to look like Caucasians. You see the manner in which our African women wear eyelashes and eyebrows, which are thin to look like Caucasian. You see the manner in which our African women are wearing wigs, which are from Indian women and Caucasian women, or artificial and made after Caucasian and Asian women, so that we are abandoning our Negroid, God-given things. When we do that, it is because we have low self-esteem. As Carter G. Woodson once said in his book, Miseducation of the Negro, we have been so thoroughly miseducated that we must re-educate ourselves. We must conquer ourselves. In Kiswahili, they say, jishinde ushinde, conquer yourself that you may have self-esteem. So one of the things that we must do is to embrace the manner in which we do our things. And that does not mean that we don't borrow from other cultures. All cultures do borrow, but you borrow in a manner that does not undermine the DNA of your culture. In Africa, we succumb so very easily. You know, when I drive across many African countries, even when I look at the mannequins that they use to hang clothes, the mannequins are white. The dolls are white, or brown, or pink. We are not modern, or we are not moving towards modernity. We are running away from ourselves. We must come back to ourselves. And when you come back to yourself, you'll be respected. Have you ever wondered why little European countries, when they go to another country, if they are the Swedes, they have a Swedish school. They have a Danish school. They have an American cultural center, an Italian cultural center, a French cultural center, a Russian cultural center, a Confucius center, because he or she who abandons his or her culture becomes slave of another culture. So let us never ever use the word modernity for what we do by running away from ourselves. You know, culture is to be celebrated. Culture is something that is to be appropriated and to be enjoyed. If you look at quite a number of communities in Africa, for example, you find, you go to the Yoruba, how they celebrate their dress. You go to the Ashanti, how they celebrate their dress. You go to the Igbo, how they celebrate their dress. But if you look at the Igbo dress, you'll find that there are elements that they took from the Turks. Nothing wrong with that. If you go to the Zulu, they celebrate, and they celebrate not only their food, their dress, the Basotho and the Swana. That is something that ought to be done and can be done. And I have no problem at all with cultural organizations being given their pride of place. And remember that since independence, in almost all African countries, there has always been a ministry called the Ministry of Culture. because we recognize the significance of culture. Is culture equivalent to tribalism? And I'm using the word tribe. The tribe is innocent. The word tribe, using it as I said I would from the beginning to mean a people with one culture and one language, is innocent. What is guilty is tribalism. The use of tribe as a basis of discriminating and harming others. That is what is problem. There is no problem with being Abakongo. No problem at all. There is no problem with being a proud Agikoyo. Be proud. I love a proud Agikoyo. If Agikoyo is not proud, then why should I like him or love him? But I do not want his Gikuyu-ness to be the basis on which he judges the Luo negatively. That is what I'm talking about. And then once we have recognized in Kenya that we are Gikuyu, we are Luo, we are Taita, we are Giriama, we are Turkana, we are Maasai, then we now say, you the Maasai, that energy and enthusiasm that you have, you the Kalenjin, that agility that you have. You the Agikoyo, that entrepreneurial ability that you have. You the Baluhia, that energy that you have. You the Luo, that quest for perfection that you have. You the Kamba, that humility that you have. You the Taita, that humility that you have. Bring it to the table that we may bake the national cake, unique and diverse in its recipe. Yet it is a cake that unifies us. That is what we ask. And that can be replicated in any country. In Mozambique, in Tanzania, everywhere. And then we will enjoy unity in diversity. Not the unity of the graveyard, where there is apparent perfection in death. No. Even in that unity, there'll be conflict, but we'll mediate those conflicts in an agreeable manner. I grew up in Nairobi, in Kenya, in the eastern part of Nairobi, and it mattered not. We ate in Karaoke's home as we did in Mutiso's, as we did in Onyango's, and we still retained those relationships. So it is our duty to tell those stories, and our media must also be used positively. How do we use our radio? How do we use our television? How do we use our newspapers? I've seen in Kenya, for example, when a thief is involved in a thieving activity in Korogosho, then they report in the headline, Kikuyus attack Luos. Which Kikuyus? It was an individual criminal who attacked another one who happened to be from another ethnic group. So messaging is very important. And some of us, and I know many who are now deliberately going out and making it known that we must begin to speak the language of unity in diversity. Some of us are beginning to say that our political organization must be different. And these ethnic alliances and ethnic kingpins should be consigned to the Museum of History alongside the spinning wheel where they belong, so that a new set of people may emerge who are speaking the language of Pan-Africanism, the language of unity in diversity. It is a tall order, but it must be taught. And that is where I talk about where we were miseducated. We must unlearn the bad things and we must re-educate our people. What are we teaching our young men and women? National exchange programs. We should have national exchange programs where people from different parts of the country visit others and they begin to understand others so that they are able to appreciate that we are all of one race, of one country, different. Just like some are short, some are tall, some are slim, some are fat. So some speak different languages and you can learn those languages if you choose to. It can be done. Is it going to be easy? No. If it is easy, it's not worth doing. That is the lesson of history. Whenever I've visited Kigali, and I visit Kigali quite often, one of the things that I do is to visit the Genocide Museum. And when you visit that museum, the lesson that you learn is that discriminating against others because of their ethnic affiliation or because of their difference is a deadly thing. It only leads to death and destruction and only leads to intergenerational hate. But there is something to learn from Rwanda. That lesson, that discrimination on the basis of ethnicity only leads to death and hate and destruction, which benefits none. But yet the Rwandese, within a generation, have demonstrated that we can heal those wounds, giving meaning to the words of Desmond Mpilo Tutu of South Africa, that there is no future without forgiveness. So the lesson there, that even when you burn down like the ash, to the ashes like the phoenix, you can rise again. There is a saying in Kiswahili that when your neighbor's head is being shaved, put water on your own. And the lesson that African countries, particularly in countries where politicians want to mobilize people on ethnic grounds, had better be warned that the logical consequence of ethnic mobilization is death. And it is only selfish people who want to burn their country and countries that they may rule over the ashes. It is our duty to stop them. It is our duty to speak about and against them. You remember those words of Martin Niemöller during the Nazi period. When they came for the Jews, I did nothing because I was not a Jew. When they came for the communists, I did nothing because I was not a communist. When they came for the socialists, I did nothing because I was not socialist. When they came for me, there was nobody to say anything. What we must always remember and learn from the words of Martin Niemöller, whenever you see injustice anywhere, speak about it and against it. And tribalism and tribal mobilization is a danger, is a cancer, is a virus, which if allowed to mutate, can only destroy. It must be fought, and fought vigorously. The Englishman who colonized our country, the French who colonized parts of Africa, the Portuguese, the Italians, the Germans, the Belgians, the Dutch, when they had met in Berlin in 1884 and 1885, they came here on what they described as a civilizing mission. They therefore characterized our nations as tribes, a people with an unintelligible language whose cultures are primitive and ought to be civilized. That is what the word tribe meant. We have retained the word tribe in our lexicon and in our vocabulary. And because words can acquire new meaning, I'm now using the word tribe to mean the nations that comprise our mega nation called Kenya, or the state called Kenya. Within the state of Kenya, there are many nations, over 50 of them, who have made the deliberate choice to live in harmony within Kenya. If we do so, and we want to do so, what we must do is to celebrate our cultures, celebrate our diversity, but on the things that touch our nation. And what do we want as a people, all of us who are Kenyans? We want peace. We want prosperity economically and otherwise. We want a nation where men and women are judged on the basis of the content of their character and their ability, not their ethnicity. We want good education. We want agriculture. We want good things for ourselves. And when we engage in politics, we want the politics and the political processes to midwife that process. And the midwifing of that process has nothing to do with tribe. It has everything to do with ability. It has everything to do with our humanness. If you today were to take a child born of Taita parents and take him or her to Turkana, he will be culturalized as a Turkana. That tells you that indeed tribalism, which is used by bankrupt politicians, is a dangerous thing. But tribe and nationhood is to be celebrated. Diversity, unity in diversity. The people called Kenya are an amazing people. When I travel across the continent of Africa, you'll be amazed. The energy, the industry, the efficiency that I've seen Kenyans exhibit in different sectors, in the hospitality sector, in Freetown, in Sierra Leone, in Accra, in Ghana, in Cape Town, in South Africa, in Juba, in Sudan, in Kampala, Uganda, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in Maryland, in the United States of America. An amazing people. Industrious. In the technology sector. But when they come home, the ethnic bug bites them. Whether they have gone to school or not, for some reason we begin to identify ourselves as Luos, Kikuyus, Kambas, Luhyas. We are great outside of the country, but we undermine ourselves when we come into our own country. And that is why, while Kenya should be one of the leading countries in the continent of Africa, we are punching below our weight because we have allowed ourselves in the domestic arena to be manipulated by our politicians and to be persuaded that judging your own on the basis of ethnicity and through ethnic lens is the right thing to do in our politics. We must exercise the ghost of ethnicity, and we must exercise the ghost of the dual personality and the schizophrenia that we exhibit, good outside, ethnically compromised inside. Kenya as a nation, unlike most African nations, have allowed to be marketed by others. And specifically speaking about Kenya, Kenya has allowed itself to be marketed as this exotic, romantic tourist destination. And for whom is it being marketed? It is marketed for foreigners. It's marketed for the German tourists, for the Italian tourists, for the Spanish tourists. And therefore, when you hear about Kenya, and indeed any other African countries, what do you hear about? The big five. You hear about elephants, you hear about rhinos, you hear about lions, you hear about buffaloes, you hear about giraffes, and then you hear about the tall and elegant Maasai who are wearing shukas. That is the jaundiced understanding that has been created by Eurocentric anthropologists and marketers who paint the wrong picture about what Africa is. That is, and what Kenya is, and that is not even 0.001% of what Kenya is. In order to understand Kenya and any other country, you've got to come and live amongst our people who are diverse and who have a rich culture, and you'll be able to understand and appreciate the old English saying that you must eat the pudding in order to understand and appreciate what it is. And that is why we keep on saying, if you don't write your story, it will be written by others and told by others in the manner that they desire. As long as the lions don't have their historians, it is the exploits of the hunter that will be talked about, not the bravery of the lion. We must change the narrative.